How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today we're going to be talking about giving birth in prison. A story coming out of Niagara County deals with an inmate who had to give birth and kind of some conflicts with medical and actually custody saving the day from the way the article reads, which I'll be reading shortly. I'm going to have Connie Alleyne, who has that's her experience. She works in medical, so we're going to kind of discuss the measures that jails and prisons should be taking when an inmate has to give birth or an inmate's going through the pregnancy process. I'm going to kind of generalize a lot because I'm not very familiar. So you notice I generalize pregnancy process. Connie will go ahead and break out, how these trimesters work and all that other stuff. But I want to really discuss the whole thing from pregnancy all the way down to the birth. But I do want to, not an effort to micromanage, but I do want to read the story from the Corrections One article that happened in Niagara County because it kind of inspired today's show. I even have a quick 19-second video that I'm going to show you. Now, real quick, guys, the show is sponsored by three entities. We have American Military University. If you guys are looking for a degree, seek higher education, please check out American Military University. They're very supportive of what we do in corrections, also very supportive of what we do on Tier Talk. And then we have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. And guys, we do put content also on Guardian RFID, tips and tricks for this profession. I do, Russ, Piper, William Young, Steve Menard. A lot of good videos there. So if you guys get a chance, please check it out. Don't forget, Inmate Manipulation Decoded is on the market. There's that little logo there. I got to find a way to enlarge that. But the link to that is in the description. And we also have Lessons Learned While Working in a Prison, My Journey from Officer to Administration. That is also now available. It's like a manual for corrections. It's a big book. It's a hardcover book. Cost about $60. I believe it's a worthy investment, especially if you are not even just entering this career, but, any level of this career. So again, and I like the back cover. Are you ready to take your correctional career to the next level? I think if you guys get a chance, if you can, pick up the book, and eventually we'll be coming out with a workbook for that, probably beginning to middle of next year. So let's get the famous author from The Cage Was Her Cocoon. Now, you guys can't see her, but she's already starting the show with this negative attitude. She's just shaking her head, and I'm going to call her, I don't stand for negativity. Connie, no. What's up, Connie?
Nothing. Everything's good. I can't complain.
It's good to see you. You look beautiful
as always.
You look beautiful as always. I said that 3 times.
Oh my God. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm excited.
This is your area.
This is my area. So it's good being able to talk about correctional health care. And I mean, bad that, something has gone awry, right? There has been some breakdown in the procedure. I don't know that this is a policy breakdown, but seems like some sort of procedural breakdown for sure. But once you get reading, we could certainly start talking about what it is to manage pregnant inmates in prison.
Yeah, and I think the good point about this, though, too, Connie, is the fact that we want people to know that what you see here, don't generalize it to the operations of all prisons and jails. I mean, okay, if something here was wrong, okay, maybe not, I don't know, we'll read the article and figure it out, but the unfair generalizations that, what we could do is hold people accountable as instead of saying, well, that's the criminal justice system, you know, and that's what we're here to kind of explain. And Connie, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So I am Connie Alleyne. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall. We've been on hiatus because the Corrections Academy has kept me quite busy. I am also the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. I'm having a good time having conversations about the various cages that have people sort of stunted or almost incapacitated to some extent, and essentially providing tools in that book to kind of help people move through that caged process. So definitely a good time of giving back, I think, to the profession and also trying to help people move through those various areas of life where they might be challenged right now. So it's a good time.
And the book is obviously very well received, your book. And you also have a workbook, correct?
I do have a workbook. The workbook has to be ordered from thecagewashercocoon.com because we weren't able to upload it to Amazon in a format that would have been good for a workbook. Essentially, if you upload it to Amazon, you can only get it in like a booklet form and not have like the spiral spine, which allows people to kind of turn through and take notes and do all that goodness. So we do have the workbooks. They are available at www.thecagewashercocoon.com.
All right. So once we get our stuff ready, I'm probably going to reach out to you again. Sandy Hassan's going to be doing the workbook, and I told her she can take all profit proceeds for that because kind of like my gift to her, she literally line edited my book. I mean, literally straight through for hours upon hours. So I need to give back.
Sandy is absolutely awesome. I want to say that we had a Women in Masca initiative the other day. We had a meeting last week, I think it was. And, I think there's about 5 or 6 women who are kind of in the group as sort of like the masterminds. And we're kind of going to be reaching out to the other women of Masca. But she was so engaging and had good ideas and supportive of what the other women brought to the table. So I think she's definitely going to be a great addition to our little women's initiative for Masca.
Well, I just actually text her, so hopefully I get that view. I can let her know you just dropped her name. And I'm actually going to see if we could work on an article for her and get it published. Maybe I can reach out to my people at AJ or ACA and see if we could solidify, because I know she is working on something for you guys for like females in law enforcement. So I think that would be pretty cool. Yes. All right, so let's do this. Let me just show you this real quick 19-second video. It's quick. I was hoping for a longer video so I wouldn't have to read the article. But again, this is all to provide context. And I know a lot of people would love to see how these videos connect to something that's current. So this is one of those episodes. So let me go ahead and play this video. So stand by with me real quick. All right, I got to actually mute myself. So hold on.
An inmate at the Niagara County Jail gave birth over the weekend. The sheriff's office confirms an inmate went into labor on Saturday at the jail and delivered a baby boy. The baby was taken to Millard Fillmore Suburban Hospital. We're told mother and baby are doing well.
So that's the quick video.
I'm like, they kept it sweet. That article is very, very.
Well, that's a month. That's a month ago. So that's when she gave birth. Now here goes the article. I'm going to try to speed through. Don't read everything, but this comes out of Lockport, New York. When a baby was born inside the Niagara County Jail in July, that's the date. I think that's when the video posted. The jail's top administrator said the child arrived so quickly there was no time to get the mother to a hospital for the delivery. The mother, however, says there was plenty of time, and the jail's internal reports back her up. Almost 2 hours passed between the moment the mother first told a jail officer of her abdominal pains and the baby's arrival, according to the internal documents and the inmate. Both say that even as contractions quickened and intensified, a supervising nurse employed by the jail's medical contractor doubted the woman was in labor and did not call an ambulance. As a result, the baby was born in a jail cell, which health experts say is among the worst place for a birth. A correctional officer, not a medical professional, received the newborn, hit him on the back to summon his first breaths, and responded when he turned blue, an internal report says. I feel like I wasn't treated as a person, says Samantha Watersham. Now, she's the inmate. She was 32. This is what she said about the jail medical staff. Waterstram said that as she headed deeper into labor, the supervising nurse mentioned more than once that her shift was ending at 7:30 p.m. She continues to say, I just feel like because I'm in jail and I'm an inmate that the nurse and the medical team just don't look at us as people, said Waterstram, who on August 22nd was sentenced by a Niagara County Judge John Ottaviano to a 1 to 3 years in state prison for a probation violation. Niagara County Jail inmates have given birth over the years, but in hospitals. Chief Daniel N. Greenwald told the Buffalo News soon after the baby was born on July 16th. The delivery was different, Greenwald explained in July, because it happened so fast. Within 30 to 40 minutes from the incarcerated individual saying they were having some pains, there was a baby born, he said. But there's more to the story. I don't think we had all the information in hand at the point in time that we have now. So now you have the sheriff getting involved, Michael Fassetti. Despite revelations about the nearly 2-hour timeline, however, the sheriff said he is satisfied with medical contractor Prime Care response, but he refused to say that a corrections officer, not a nurse, received the baby. She was under medical care here at the facility. Now, this is the sheriff speaking. She was being observed here at the facility. Her complaint of abdominal pain or labor pains weren't being ignored. And he also adds later that every childbirth is different. Now, babies are not supposed to be delivered in jail. State rules require jails to plan to get inmates going into labor to medical facilities that have better resources to respond to emergencies during birth. But the Niagara County Jail's response was better than the response seen elsewhere. A woman in Denver, okay, I'm going to skip over that. Jails are not medical facilities, said Dr. Carolyn Suffren, an associate professor of gynecology at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, whose research focuses on reproductive health care for incarcerated women. They do not have the staff who are trained to help women give birth, and they are not trained to resuscitate or support a newborn baby. They're not safe places for a person to give birth. I want to discuss that with you, so remember that. Remember that, because I think that's key. I want to bring that up. Correctional facilities hesitate to transport people to hospitals, and we're going to touch on this too.
Who's saying that? The doctor is saying that?
Well, the first part came from the gynecologist saying
Right.
that the nurses aren't properly trained.
Right.
The second part is not quoted, so I'm assuming it's coming from the writer, the journalist.
Oh, okay.
Correctional facilities hesitate to transport people to hospitals because it creates logistical hassles and security risks. Oh, no, the doctor said it. The professor said it. Those concerns, she said, should be outweighed by the harm that can occur. I don't like that. We'll get to that. And you know what I'm talking about. I don't like that generalized assumption. We need to think about the health, safety, and welfare of the birthing person as well as the baby. And again, we'll get to this, but of course we do. But again, let's get to that, because sometimes you get frustrated. You want to say it in the moment. Okay, so the inmate has been arrested a few times in recent years. She entered the jail in May on a charge of endangering the welfare of her child because of unsafe living conditions in her home, according to court records. She also was accused of violating the terms of probation she received after misconduct while behind bars in 2019. Watersham agreed in an interview that she didn't always report to a probation officer. Now, this is the story now. The jail's medical team was informed of Watersham's pregnancy. The baby, however, arrived weeks before the due date. Still, Waterstram said she had given birth to 5 other children and knew how her body performed during labor. She said that when she started experiencing pains on the evening of July 16th, she knew the baby was coming. Connie, from the corner of my eye, I thought you were vaping. All right, even if I just thought you were vaping from the corner of my eye. If you could watch this video, go back. I look at you like, I was like, okay, no, obviously you're drinking water, but it was the weirdest thing. You'll see from my perspective. Even if it was a false alarm and you go to the hospital, all you do is come back, she says. It's no big deal. Waterstram told the Buffalo News that she first told a corrections officer of her labor pains between 5 and 5:30. The correction officer, Natalie Wagner, said in a report that Watersham gave her the news at 5:47. It's a little inconsistent. The baby was born 1 hour and 48 minutes later at 7:35. So they're going from the 5:47 p.m. time. The Niagara County Sheriff's Office refused the Buffalo News Freedom of Information request for the internal reports, which makes sense. It's an investigative matter, saying their release would violate the inmate's right to keep her health information private. Plus, it's an investigative matter, as I said. But a reporter at the news has seen the internal reports, and Waterstram, when interviewed, said she wanted the truth made public and her name used. Here's the thing. I just want to mention one concern. This is an investigative matter, so leaking out information could violate the investigation. It could create bias. But having said that,
compromise the investigation.
Compromise. So I'm not saying this didn't happen, but you guys got to let the investigation play out. So right now, releasing information about the investigation, you're right, investigation could compromise. So Wagner wrote that, this is the officer, she immediately told another correctional officer, Tracy Hayner, that the inmate was feeling pain in her lower abdomen. Hayner was crucial to the events that unfolded. It was my understanding that inmate Waterstrand was currently pregnant and due in a few weeks. And this is what Hayner wrote on her summary. I considered her complaint to require urgent medical attention. So he must have got a copy of the reports written of the incident. Hayner turned to a nurse who was nearby, responding to another inmate's medical needs, and asked her to evaluate the mother. The nurse did so, then said she would ask a doctor on call whether she should go to a hospital. That's what this officer wrote. Jail records show that the director of nursing, Joanne Brossoit, arrived at 6:23 p.m. So remember, 5:47 was when it was reported. She arrives on scene at 6:23 to take the fetal heart rate and other vital signs and to feel the contractions with their hands. At that point, they were about 4 minutes apart. Brossoit received her nursing license almost 40 years ago, and according to her Facebook page, started working at Prime Care in 2016. She stated it was her gut feeling that the woman was not in labor, according to Waterstrand and the summaries written by Hayner and Wagner. So everybody agreed that she said it was her gut feeling. Hayner wrote that the nursing director suspected the inmate was experiencing Braxton Hicks contractions, which you'll tell us what those are, a tightening of the abdomen that comes and goes and is sometimes called false labor pains. As she left, Nurse Brossoit told Hayner, that's the officer, to call her if the mother's water broke or if she lost her mucus plug or if the contractions came closer together. Around half an hour later, Hayner's report and jail records are fuzzy on the exact time. Brossoit returned to discuss moving the mother to the infirmary if she remained in pain, but the nurse was not sending her to a hospital, according to Hayner's summary. So I know you're going to want to discuss that. By 7:15, the situation was urgent. The two correction officers spoke again. Wagner told Hayner that the mother was crying and yelling in pain. Waterstrand had timed her contractions and found they were 2 minutes apart. Waterstrand was past the point when she should be in a hospital or a birthing facility, according to Kaiser Permanente, a nonprofit health plan that operates nationwide. It says women who have given birth before should go to a hospital when contractions occur every 5 to 7 minutes. In her report, Hayner wrote that she called Brossoit, who had returned to the jail's medical unit, to tell her of Waterstrand's condition. Did the inmate's water break? That's what the nurse asked, Brossoit asked. And then Hayner goes, I told her that I do not know, only that she was yelling in pain. That's what the officer reports. RN Brossoit then stated that I needed to go back and ask her. I told RN Brossoit, this is the officer now, that she needs to come back up here and see her, then hung up the phone. So now you have a conflict between custody and medical now. The sheriff and his top jail administrator said they were not dissatisfied with the medical team's response. Even if they were the medical team, doesn't work directly for them. In most respects, the jail's medical care is run by Prime Care, a private company that's among the nation's largest, specializing in medical care inside prisons and jails. This is like their third vendor it talks about, and they paid $2.37 million for this contract. That Niagara County hired Prime Care in 2016 for $2.37 million in the first year. About a month later, then they had issues. The inmate died in custody. Let's see. Anything else we want to add before we go? Prime Care is centered out of Harrisburg, PA. When interviewed, Waterstrand said she was troubled by something she heard from Brossoit. This is the inmate talking about the nurse. She literally kept saying she was getting off work at 7:30, like that was supposed to mean something to me, said the inmate. She did not take it as a joke. Now, after hanging up with Brossoit on the night of July 16th, the officer headed back to Waterstrand's cell. A licensed practical nurse who lacks, and you're going to explain this too, who lacks the training of a registered nurse, was in the woman's unit giving out medicine. The LPN joined Hayner, according to Hayner's report. Waterstrand had removed her shorts, and Hayner could see the crown of the baby's head as the inmate pushed. Then Waterstrand announced that the baby was stuck. Now this comes from Hayner's report. I then, with a gloved hand, assisted the baby's head come out by circling around its face where it appeared to be stuck. The baby's head then came out. The inmate pushed a few more times. The baby came out rather quickly and was caught by the officer. The time of birth listed is 7:35 p.m. She said she held the boy to her chest to listen for breathing. Hearing none, she cleared his mouth. I did hear a small squeaky cry, but the baby was still struggling to breathe. I then flipped him over and gave a few back blows in an attempt to clear his airway. After the back blows, the baby began crying. That's from the officer. By then, an ambulance was on its way, and Brossoit had arrived in the cell. The reports show her playing no role in the delivery. The scramble wasn't over. Suddenly, the newborn was turning blue. Hayner wrote that she warmed the child with wet towels. The LPM stimulated his back, and registered nurse who had arrived with Brossoit suctioned his mouth. Stronger breathing returned. Waterstrand told the news that when she saw Brossoit, she complained to her for doubting the baby was coming. Brossoit did not protest and reported that she had requested an ambulance. So the baby weighed about 7 pounds, 13 ounces, is now living with the father. And then you have the baby's father says, his name is Anthony Primerano. He says she should have been brought to the hospital. The hospital could have sent her back. You're messing with somebody's health. Waterstrand will go on at length about Hayner's role in delivering the baby. She says she really deserves all the credit for my baby being okay. She said she thanked the corrections officer profusely when she returned to the jail after a few days with her newest child in Miller Fillmore Suburban Hospital. We just cried, Watersham said. I just thanked her, and I just wanted to tell her how much I appreciated her. It was a good emotional moment. So I spoke a lot there. So how would you like to break this down? I'll have you lead the rest.
So this thing's wrong, I think, on every level, but I just want to just preface by saying that there are standards of care that we operate by in medical in any prison setting that you're in, right? And those standards of care dictate the way we treat individuals. And in particular, as it relates to this story, there are standards of care for pregnant inmates, right? And those standards of care go beyond your regular prison jail standards. They include the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And then, of course, in addition to having that, in general, what I am aware of in most female facilities, we have an OBGYN who is part of like the staff, like the care team, not like an outside person. And we generally have, our nursing staff, right? So I think just starting from the top, right, that, woman is in labor, woman says she's in pain, she is pregnant. And yes, it's before her due date, which is, I think, something noted in the article. Although it's before her due date, the reality is that she had at least 4 or 5 kids, I think it says, prior to this baby. And so what we know is that a woman who's had children before, each labor gets a little easier, right? Not to say there's less complications or that it's not difficult going through the labor process, but it's a little easier. And so for the woman to be in pain, to be advocating for herself, to be going to custody, and I get it, the inmates can be manipulative and all that goodness, but a thorough exam is always warranted, right? Like that is what I know the care practice to be. Someone who we know is pregnant could be going into premature labor. It could be anything. The expectation is that whatever medical professional has been pulled into the loop of this situation, the expectation is that they do a medical examination on this person to ensure that they are or aren't at risk. And quite frankly, one of the notes that's added in this article is that they generally send people out, right? And the reality is that we do, because we don't have the diagnostic machines in most facilities to do a thorough testing or evaluation of someone who's pregnant, right?
Now, wait, Connie, I wanted to ask something about that real quick. So how that nurse made this gut feeling, she said it was Braxton Hicks, right? Is that what it's called?
Yes. So I mean, it happens, right? People have, labor pains or labor-like pains. It's the tensing of the abdomen. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're in labor, but there's also steps to evaluate, to rule in or rule out that this is true labor versus not. So a gut feeling isn't a diagnostic test, right? It isn't. I don't know what policy or procedure lists your gut feeling being an appropriate way to indicate someone is in labor or not, right? So when you think about it from that standpoint, yes, I think as medical professionals, there's a level of judgment and experience that you bring to the table, and you can call it something. But that doesn't mean that you don't take the next step to confirm that this is actually Braxton Hicks or not. So the nurse who says at a point she's going to call the on-call doctor,
right,
like that is the highest level of licensure that she could call to get confirmation of what the next steps would do. It's kind of like if it's, end of shift or late shift and there is no doctor on staff, that is typically the procedure, that you would call the on-call doctor, get the doctor's orders as to what you should do in treatment. It's also like when we go through intake. If you go through an intake late at night and, the inmate says they were on X meds or they have this history of whatever, you call and get the doctor's order as to what your next steps would be in the treatment plan for this inmate. The inmate doesn't just come in and sits for hours until the doctor comes in. So specifically in a case of someone pregnant, we've never taken, it's not been my experience that we've taken the risk of doing a loose assessment in that way.
Well, I love what you're saying, because I want people to realize that, again, we're only reading what the article says. But with that said, I want people to realize that we don't want this generalized out. If this is what happened, we want people to realize that most prisons and jails across this country do not operate in this fashion. If this article is accurate, and as I said, if they got it from the report, you have the correctional officers supporting a lot of what the inmate was saying. So, so I don't mean to attack the person in medical, but the article seems to point the finger that way. And just want to confirm. So even if you were in a regular hospital, there's no way you can confirm if the contractions are real or fake based on a gut feeling, correct?
Correct. So there is a fetal heart monitor, and I don't know if they had one in that facility, but there is a fetal heart monitor that can be placed on a woman where they could see where they're monitoring the baby. And then there's the monitor that they put around her where they're monitoring her contractions. And I don't know that all female facilities actually have those in-house. And honestly, there was a question about qualified professionals, right? Like, because not all nurses are labor and delivery nurses or neonatal nurses. Like, there's a reason why there's specialties within the nursing field, because there are different policies, procedures, standards of care that come into play when you are providing care to an infant or a newborn, right? So, and not all nurses have that level of care. So the fact that there is a mention of the qualifications of the medical staff, I think there could be some validity to that, because it's just a reality, right? Like, I could have went to school for general nursing and that's it, right? Like, yes, you get exposure to other areas of nursing, but that doesn't mean that at the drop of a hat, you're ready to jump in and perform within that particular certification scope.
Yeah, and you got as you said, RN, LPN, APN. I mean, each area has their own level of expertise, and you can't generalize, say, well, because you're a nurse,
right,
you're able to do these things. I just want to tell you something.
Even the mention of the LPN, I don't want to skip over that, because that's really important. Many states, as a movement by, I think, the Department of Health, maybe, or the Department of Public Health, many states had kind of put a little pressure on removing the LPN from clinical practice almost, right? Like, so there was a limit to the LPN licensure, the scope of their license, and the scope of the clinical practice that they could provide. So to have an LPN assist is great, but if that LPN was the only person in sort of managing this delivery of a baby, it could have been an even more serious situation.
Yeah, and that is mentioned. They mentioned that that's why the LPN, I think that was the person that was next to the officer, was kind of always going to either the doctor or the director. I think she knew what her role was.
Yes.
So I really, and the funny thing is, guys, I don't want to generalize it out with the primal care, the vendor, because it looks like this could be an individual accountability here. So I know we like to quickly generalize it out based on the vendor. And yes, they mentioned that the vendor did have an inmate that may have died in custody. Well, you can go to regular hospitals and they may have people that have passed. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I don't want to minimize the fact that if, as we're reading this, if they're holding somebody accountable, sometimes what people tend to do in these articles is they use personal accountability as a way to generalize fault in all systems, and I want to be fair. I want to be fair in our assessment here. I mean, again, reading by the article, this would be like the same as saying, okay, well, this pregnancy, this birth was, badly managed. That's how the whole criminal justice system works. No, it's not true. Or this must be a problem with the primal care. No, there's an individual that could have gone rogue a little bit.
So because you could see there's a tension, right? So like you have a nurse that says, I need to call the on-call. Somehow the director of nursing gets involved. While her nursing licensure or level may have been higher than the nurse who reached out, it's not higher than the on-call doctor. Right. So, I mean, it made me think immediately, was there some tension between the nurse and that director of nursing, that the nurse didn't necessarily go to her first, but was going to the on-call, right? And it could be just the way they wrote the article. So like, I want to, be as objective as I can. They could have written the article in a manner to sort of allude to tension, or there could have just been tension, right? So like, I think when you have an officer who's also reaching out, right? So the officer is acknowledging that this nurse couldn't get the action that she needed. I personally looked at it as the officer is now supporting the nurse who's trying to do the right thing, but can't get the upper level of action being taken. And so hoping that the officer's now interaction would help prompt that director of nursing or whomever else needs to be involved to come back down and get involved. But I don't know why, if an officer is calling, we're having an exchange over the phone as opposed to coming down to see whether or not the water broke or the mucus plug came out. Like, I can't even imagine I'm telling an officer to go do
I was just going to say that. I mean, so I love what you're saying. So two things real quick that you're saying spot on is, you have the LPN and then you have this nurse director. Both of them are representing the same company. So right off the bat, I don't want to lean towards the vendor when you also have a nurse that seems to know what she needs to do. I'm assuming she called the doctor called the director for like a second call, like look at it, give me what you got. I'd rather take it from you because you're licensed in this or whatever it would be.
Right.
And then maybe she was in a rush to go home because she says it multiple times. The officers agreed that, she kind of was,
go home.
I want to go home. And then the other thing is, you're right. Like, I think that's what kind of motivated the officer to kind of like, you got to get over here. Now, I've never worked around bad medical, to be honest with you. I love my medical departments, however people may perceive them. I know what they make the effort in doing, regardless of the outcome, but they go 100% effort, but we're not in control of the outcome. We're in control of our effort. So again, I don't like generalizing. I think medical care in the prisons kind of get a bad rep, just like correctional officers do. So in all fairness, again, I want to separate individual negligence versus outcomes that are out of our control, but people give 100% effort to.
But I also think it's important, as you're saying that, to highlight the nurse who got involved was there providing care to someone else, right?
Yes.
So when she saw that the need was greater than what she was doing, she stopped what she was doing and went to address the other need. And so as medical professionals, they're trained to triage.
Yes.
So if I got someone in pain and they're showing me that they're in a critical space or they're in crisis, I now can see that my priority has shifted. So the fact that the nurse who was doing something else now shifts, because she's still responsible for whatever that was. I think does it say she was doing meds or she was?
Yeah, I think she's handing out medication.
Right. So, and that in of itself could be a process, right? Depending on how many people on meds, it can be quite an overwhelming process.
Oh, yeah.
So the fact that she stopped doing meds to go and address this woman who seems to be in crisis, I think is something that we have to acknowledge and kind of just say, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I don't want to downplay Wagner either, because so Wagner's the first officer who talks to Hayner, who winds up kind of dealing with that nurse. But so here's the funny thing. So we work in a system where we try to shift liability, but it's true. Sometimes it happens, right? So I'm an officer. I see there's an inmate in distress.
Oh,
I go ahead.
It's so politically incorrect.
Well, but you know what I'm saying? Oh, because the way I said it, right? The way I said it, right? But hear me, because I know you know where I'm getting at. So
Yes.
if I sometimes you'll get some people who will see that, okay, well, you know what? I forwarded medical doesn't want to come here. I'll just put in the logbook that they're not going to come, and
then
I'm covered. I did my part.
Yep.
This officer Wagner and Hayner, but really Wagner at first, she didn't give up. And then Hayner definitely didn't give up by that phone call saying, no, you're going to get your, I'm not looking for this. This is not my role.
Yes, I don't want to fight with you over something you're responsible for. Just come down here and do what you got to do. Like, why are you trying to send me to go look for a mucus plug? What the hell's going on here?
And again, it's the answer, because Kai Tyson, the liability for that also is that the officer, even if the officer did do that, and let's say she identified what she thought was the water, the mucus, it's not in her area of expertise.
No,
if something was to happen, they'll be like, well, what the hell are you identifying that for? So
or you go down there and you don't know what you're looking at,
right?
And you go back and say, oh nah, she's good, right? Because either way, it's still not your call to
make.
But
look what you just said. That was amazing. You see how the responsibility could have been shifted, because if this Hayner would have listened to the nurse's directive, which, by the way, the nurse cannot tell custody what to do. I want people to know that. And believe it or not, custody can't tell medical do when it comes to departmental concerns. Safety and security is different. Custody has a level of influence over medical when it regards safety and security, but not on this. So when you get this nurse to go ahead and say, go check this for me, that officer, it's great that she knew what her role was, because think about it. Now the nurse just shifted that to her. So she comes back and says, oh, I didn't see anything. And the nurse thinks, well, we're good.
Yeah, she's good.
Yeah, but the funny thing is that you wouldn't be able to, right? So the nurse is sitting there. How are you going to go with what the officer said when they don't have that level of expertise?
How do you document that, though? Like, everything is so wrong with that, right? So, like, even from just a medical documentation perspective, right? Here are my clinical notes. I sent officer so-and-so to go check to see if there was a mucus plug.
I don't know what the hell that is.
Like what? You did what?
Like,
you didn't go check? You didn't go send another medical professional to do it? You sent the officer to go do it? What the hell is that?
I would be looking, I'd be looking, well, what do I plug that into? You know what I mean? Like, what is that? But now here's another thing about that. Just to so as I said, I mean, we are going to send inmates out. Now, one of the things that the doctor said, the gynecologist who, speaks on, she's a professor. She speaks on, her expertise is in maternal care, whatever it is, for incarcerated women. So I want to know how you feel about that remark where she kind of says that the nurses that work in the prisons or jails are not really trained to give birth. That's why you're sending the inmates out. What's your thoughts on, first off, we're sending the inmates out because more of equipment. But you also mentioned that there, like you said, there may not be training like that. So I would like you to maybe explain that.
So nursing school is nursing school, right? Like, and I have not been to nursing school to know specifically all the modules and courses that have to be taken in the midst of nursing school. And I'm sure that someone has taken some labor and delivery nursing in a general nursing program, right? But there are people who specialize in that. And I think her statement may have come from most nurses who are practicing generally. Labor and delivery is not their area of expertise. So they may not have all of the clinical skills or insights or clinical experience in delivering a baby, which could make for this situation be a very dangerous one for mother and child. So even though she made the statement and it could be interpreted as something negative, I think it's just highlighting that not all nurses are going to have experience in this area.
Right. And then I mean, I don't know if the nurse that made these decisions, your director of nurse, is a subscriber to my channel, but I don't think she will be after this. Because I got some. So you mentioned also, now again, I just want to remind people, in my experience, we've always taken inmates out. Connie's experience the same, unless you can't, which could happen. I mean, birth could be very unpredictable. My wife never even felt contractions, and they were like, yo, you're giving birth right now. And both times she never felt contractions. She felt the fucking epidural. Like that. But she didn't feel the contractions. But so again, I get it's unpredictable. But you mentioned that also a lot of female facilities, they have a doctor, a gynecologist on site. Is that something that you're? I mean, we don't want to say most, because we don't. I mean, may not know. But you're saying,
part of the standards of care is that you need to be able to provide regular prenatal visits, prenatal care, and prenatal consultation, right? And in order for you to do that, you need qualified medical professionals to do that. And essentially, an OBGYN or a medical APRN would be on site to be able to do that. So does everyone have an OBGYN and a medical APRN on site to provide women's health care and reproductive consultations and all that stuff? Probably not all, right? But generally, the standards of care for women is that you have an OBGYN available to provide that care and the insights needed to ensure for a safe delivery. So like I would say specifically, right, prenatal medical exams, lab testing, STD testing, advising the inmates of like safety precautions during pregnancies, prenatal nutritional guidance and counseling, anything specific to prenatal care, and then someone there to support for postnatal care, right? Dealing with and anything I guess related to pregnancy outcomes. So say you had a baby, you had a healthy baby, great. If it doesn't turn out that you don't end up with a healthy baby or a live pregnancy or something, like those professionals are the one who provide support and pregnancy counseling and that type of stuff to care for our pregnant inmates.
Now, and I'm hoping to think that if you're negotiating with the vendor, that should be something that's being offered. Now, even though we do have, let's say, a doctor that's made available, that doesn't mean that the baby is going to be born inside the prison. They're still going to go ahead and arrange for it. Because as I said, I've seen it arranged. I've seen medical where they get kind of sure of what that due date's going to be, and they make the phone calls. And when you go in, it's set up just like it would be for the public. It's a beautiful room, except there's some restrictions, obviously based on safety and security. And speaking of that, I want to jump on something. We'll keep this quick because I just want to kind of defend something. Custody, we understand the preservation of life, and I'm sure we're used to having to get that inmate ready to get them moving. So for some people to make, I don't like the fact that the doctor made this judgment that, it's too much of a hassle. So, we're going to go ahead and try to do what we can inside the facility. Don't make that. That's a wild assumption. I don't know where you're getting those facts from. As you can tell from this story, the concern had nothing to do at this point with custody getting the inmate ready to go. The concern was getting the okay from medical to say the inmate has to go, because we can't make that. Again, that's between medical, and when they make their phone calls, they commit to appointment, and then we're told, go in this direction, they'll be ready for you. So that assumption from that doctor to me is way off key, because that's not even related to the dialogue. Because if you listen to what's said here, if you read what's said here, it's not like medical said, okay, take the inmate out, and custody said, no, we're not going to do it because it's too much of a hassle. It's just that we couldn't take the inmate out because we need the approval from that medical department. And the other thing,
so just to add to that, there is usually a care plan, right? There is usually a delivery plan. Once we know we've got an estimated delivery date, there's usually a plan in place. So it's not like this is a willy-nilly operation. If in fact there is this is a high risk pregnancy, for example. There's a plan with the hospital on how we're going to manage this inmate and manage the labor of this inmate, which involves the inmate, it involves medical, it involves custody, so that we're all on the same page and we all know what to expect. If there's a scheduled C-section, we also know what to expect. There's a plan in place. So I just want to make sure that the public is aware that we do everything that we can to have a plan in place. So one, it helps custody plan, right? Like, oh, we know we're going to need, transport here on this day for whatever time, and all that's arranged. But what we also allow for that to do is custody is able to go into the room that the inmate's going to be in to make sure there aren't any safety security concerns in the room, right? Like there was a point where I remember there being like, so the doctor had like a stapler in there. Like there was like these random things in a room, which, our custody went in, they kind of came out, cleared it out. That way the room was ready for the inmate. So like, I get what the inmate is saying about being treated inhumanely, but on the back end, in most facilities, I can speak for the facilities that I've covered and other medical professionals I've spoken to in other states, where there is true preparation for women who are going into labor when we have a care plan and we know what to do. In these emergency situations, we typically activate 911 immediately and have that person sent out so that we aren't delivering babies in the facility. That is really where we are. So while this is what we're talking about now, I think it's important to know that there is a coordinated effort between medical and custody surrounding these pregnant inmates.
Yeah, and I think her name was Watersham. She also said a very generalized statement that medical doesn't see us as human, whatever. I mean, again, I'm going to disagree with that because having worked alongside with medical, trust and believe, they are very good advocates for the needs of those inmates. So again, I don't want to generalize it based on someone's failure or negligence. So I find that to be an unfair statement because, again, that rivals the one nurse who was trying to do the right thing. And maybe even the doctor who trusted the opinion of the director of nursing. Right. Because they say, hey, can you check on it and see what we got to do? And she's like, this is probably bullshit. I got to go home soon. And I mean, again, that's just based on what's drawn. But again, the generalized assumptions always gets to me because it's a great way to open up that box, that political message. Like, again, just going back with the doctor, making that assumption about custody, where is that relevant to the dialogue? That was not relevant to the dialogue. If you actually saw what was happening, you read what would happen, and it's not a plug for your agenda. You gave a plug for your agenda. There's everything that happened that day had nothing to do with custody's willingness or unwillingness to take the inmate out.
I mean, even the author of the article, right, who goes on to talk about what the inmate's charges were and all this other stuff. Like when you think about relevance to the story at hand, the story of officer having to deliver a baby, what this inmate was charged with has no relevance. And as medical professionals, we've been trained to look at the patient, right? So here's what has presented to us. Okay, it was negligence. It was this, it was that. Here are all her charges. Okay, great. So here it is. You've got the inmate saying that she's being treated inhumanely. You've got the author of this article who's highlighting her charges, almost as though like the child endangerment means that we would somehow not treat her accordingly because she's already endangered a child. Like we just don't operate in that space as much as like, and it could just be details, right? But like if you're critically thinking about this article and the pieces that are added, even the piece that the sheriff says, he makes a statement about I'll have to go back and look at it, but he made a statement that stood out in my mind and I'll just check it out. But it was almost like every pregnancy is different. Like that just is odd for a sheriff to say that. Like
how would he, like, again, he's talking out of the box.
Right. And in this situation, if we are just looking at what happened, here is an inmate who went into labor, who was advocating for herself. You've got custody trying to help. You have a nurse who's trying to get the level of support she needs to get this inmate the care that they need, right? Those were the moving parts, and all this other stuff happening on the outside, the director not doing this or that, or maybe the on-call doctor leaning on the director for her insights, the friction with custody and the director, like all that stuff is nonsense in the grand scheme of, here's an inmate who went into labor, you have a nurse and you have custody who are both trying to get this inmate to where she needs to be. And those who were the decision makers were not in support of doing what needs to get done. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, and as I said, even if I was a sheriff, that's a question, sometimes you got to humble yourself and say, that's not for me to answer.
Right.
Even though I know the answer could be common sense, I don't have the credentials to answer that, which leads me to be easily challenged. Sometimes I wish these people in the higher ups would know exactly what to pass off. Yeah, right. Don't get me wrong. You should be aware of it, but you're not the person that should be speaking on that.
Right. You shouldn't answer that question.
You're leaving yourself open to, your comment has no validity because you don't have the credentials to say it.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is custody stepping up. Now, for people getting in this profession, this goes to show you the adapting and adjusting. Right now, based on this article, we get to a situation where the birth is imminent. It's going to happen.
Yep.
So you get these officers who step out of their prescribed role to some extent, only because they're forced to. Because, guys, don't forget, custody, we are first responders. So I'm kind of... It kind of, when we have medical there, the only reason why I'm saying stepping out of our prescribed role is because we have medical there. Now, granted, if medical wasn't there, it is going to become our prescribed role because that's our job. But when you have medical there and they're not doing it, the officer to say, well, fuck it, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Even though medical's here, I'm just going to go ahead and do it because it has to be done. You got to say bravo to that, because she stepped up. She did what she could. One thing is she saved lives. That's one thing. Let's not minimize that. That's the highest thing. She saved liability. The one thing I did not hear from the sheriff, and I don't know, maybe it just wasn't quoted, was the thanks to those officers. He was quick to, I guess because maybe there's contracts. You never know. Sometimes with contracts where the money goes, you never know. Yep. But he was quick to...
The politics, as much as I'm hesitant, but politics cannot supersede life, right?
So he was quick to thank or not make sure that their medical wasn't condescending. I get it. He was basically saying, well, they're still good. And then he did a couple little things. One is he said, we're not responsible for them to make their own. Yes, you are. Anybody that comes in your facility that you hire, you are responsible for them. You oversee it. That's your job. So I don't like that. To me, that's a sign of bad leadership to some extent.
Right. We're a team, but we're not a team.
Yeah. So right. So I thought what he did was he complimented them, but then he pushed away the responsibility of the outcome. But the one thing is that he also didn't congratulate, because they even said it was never mentioned about the officers giving birth or delivering the baby, because it wasn't mentioned, but it was read in the reports that you could see Hayner, what she did. She wrote a very well-written report. So having said that, you have this concern, but that was a good chance to also step up and say, you know what, the officers stepped up and did their job. The problem with the sheriff, there's a conflict now. If I step up and I say the officers did this, the conflict comes, well, if the officers did this, medical didn't do this.
Medical didn't do it.
Right. So the sheriff kind of picked the side at that moment. But the problem is you got two officers right now, and that nurse, but let's focus on the officers right now that stepped up. They should be getting recognition. Literally, they stepped up, took the role, and got that baby in. Again, a first responder just jumping in and do what's expected for them, and not to hear the sheriff comment on that when asked. It's like, why? Because you're afraid that if you comment on the good that they did, that it's going to point out to the negative. Hey, guys.
I think we're so accustomed to taking for granted all of the small victories, right? Because I feel like, yes, this is the one that's on the newspaper, that's in the newspaper, but how many other times is custody stepping up and doing things outside of their prescribed role and don't get the recognition or the thank you? And I think, you and I have made it clear that it's not okay not to say thank you. right? Like we always try to highlight where people are doing things above and beyond.
Appreciation.
And show that appreciation for them going above and beyond, right? Because the nurse could, even if it was just medical, that nurse couldn't do it by herself, right? And like it's anytime there's a code and like there's CPR, there's already custody intervention, our teamwork, our collaboration, our partnership is always highlighted in those instances. And I don't know that there's always a thank you.
There's not, and as I said, the appreciation carries a long way. I mean, that's beyond. Well, that's a recognition because it's an external event. It's something unique, but it's also an appreciation because, having said that, the people. I mean, yes, they were officers, but this was more than just being an officer. That's the people that wear the uniform there. Yeah. Because that decision wasn't just made as me being an officer and stepping up. Those two women made that decision because they saw her as a mother professionally, and said like, yo, we got to do something. So there's so many
lives. This is someone in pain. This is someone who can't help themselves. This is someone who isn't lying. Just imagine, I'm just putting myself in an officer's shoes for a second. I have now decided I'm getting involved. I got my gloves on. I got whatever protective stuff I could put on, and I'm catching a baby, right? Like I didn't come into work thinking I was doing that today. You know what I'm saying? Like, so something clicked that said, I'm needed, right? And I stepped up. And I think that's the part like people don't realize, like I'm just in the unit and I'm kind of managing, population management, right? I'm managing the inmates with their need or whatever. Here's a situation that's just popped off in my unit. And this is beyond me taking responsibility or accountability for what's going on in the unit. I'm making sure this inmate and this baby doesn't die here.
Yeah, I love what you're saying because like you can look at it from an isolated perspective, like that's medical's department, this is mine, but the problem is the road connected here. And what those officers did was they saw where that connection was. And at the end of the day, guys, I want to talk about the higher picture real quick. At the end of the day, when shit hits the fan, as much as we think we could push it off departmentally, people go after the facility as a whole. So what's going to happen is everybody gets pulled into this, So yeah, it may have been medical's responsibility, but you were there too. So you're involved and you're involved and you're involved and you're involved. You fucking go Oprah Winfrey. Yeah, everybody's involved. Everybody's involved in this lawsuit. You know what I mean? Go Oprah Winfrey. Everybody gets a fucking lawsuit. Everybody gets sued in this. But the thing is that the highest level is looking at the facility as a whole. So even though we may be looking at it, well, that's not my response, that's yours. These two officers that stepped up, I think kind of also knew, besides the fact that, yes, this is the right thing to do because it is the right thing to do. The other thing is like, hey, I'm not losing my job. I'm going to make all efforts. And if the job wants to come at me, let them come at me because there's no way they're going to be able to come at me and I get in trouble for doing this. And sometimes, you know what? That's where the discretion is. Guys, real quick, and I think this makes sense, discretion. Discretion falls into it's what does the policy want? Sometimes the procedure isn't always there, so you have to kind of adapt. But in this case here, you got this woman, she's giving birth. It's happening, and we want that baby alive. We want that mother alive. And at this point here, all efforts are going in. So for the two officers that stepped up and went outside that, and the reason why I'm saying, I want to mention one more time, the reason why I'm saying outside of their prescribed role, because I still feel it's their responsibility if medical wasn't there, because they're first responders. But when you have medical there, they could easily say, well, medical's here. That's not my role. But they stepped out of that and said, no, it is my role. If medical doesn't want to step up, I'm stepping up. And I said, I get the initiative and I totally understand. I actually think if I was in that position, because I know me, I would have documented the refusal for that person to come back. I would have definitely called for an area supervisor saying, yo, she's telling me to look for this, this, and this, and that's not my thing. But if I did see this woman starting to give birth and it's happening, and I'm not getting the partnership by medical, I'm calling my supervisors, I'm calling a medical code, I'm doing everything I can to get all I need over here. And if I got to step in, because at the end of the day, I think there would be liability on the facility. And for the sheriff, or the chief, they should literally step up, because even if there's a lawsuit regardless, those two officers kind of mitigated some of that to some extent.
Absolutely.
So they and then they say, well, I know he took the side with medical, and he said, well, takes a side, and then he's kind of like, but that's kind of a choice they made. Yeah, but the facility was responsible. The facility is responsible for that choice, and their lack of action forced your officers to do this. So I think that statement by him, he doesn't understand the consequential choice of what that medical person did that forced custody now to step into that role.
Because then, I mean, so I feel like this could be a whole different story, right?
Oh, yeah.
Suppose that baby and that inmate did not survive, right? Like, this would be a completely different discussion, right? Because then people are going to be looking to point the fingers, right? And where was the ball dropped? Where was their negligence? Where did we go wrong in this situation, right? Because suppose custody decided this isn't my thing, I'm not going to get involved. The director of nursing or nursing supervisor, whoever it was, already made the judgment call. The medical people are here in the unit, right? Which makes it even worse. Medical is here in the unit, and you've got custody on the phone asking for someone to come back because this is not my area of expertise, and they refuse. Anything could have went wrong. When that baby came out blue, and suppose no one was there to help work the baby out and unwrap the baby and get the baby breathing.
The CO did it, right?
Right. Suppose they was like, right, listen, that ain't my job. I'm not doing that.
Right.
Right. And maybe, could it be a difference, right? Because this was a female officer, right? Maybe a male officer would have been a little more apprehensive to jump in and do all of that. I agree. Right. I mean, you might see the life and death situation, but you also see my job. I see Priya. I see all this other stuff.
I was thinking,
and I'm weighing all of this before I get involved. So I just want to, just highlight that we can't sort of gloss over the fact that they got involved in a way that goes beyond their scope, that goes beyond their prescribed role, and they saved 2 lives. And if they hadn't, the outcomes could have been worse.
And what's funny, I don't know if they could have probably an ethical concern, but Primal Care should pay those officers some money. Because the lawsuit that could happen, again, reading by what the article says. And the reason why I'm kind of leaning what the article says is they're reading off supposedly the reports of the staff who is in agreement with the inmate, And again, all staff, including a representative of the Primal Care to some extent. So yeah, it was a good discussion. I mean, again, something spark. I mean, I don't like to Monday night quarterback, whatever it is, but I think it was worthy. It was requested that we do it. Having said that, it's from the article. We're just feeding off what the article says. We know sometimes the articles are not 100% accurate. That's why I read specifically from the article, and then we dived in from the article's perspective. But I want you to know something. For once, it's sad that this was a circumstance that happened, but it was great for those COs to step up and show people what COs really do. I mean, literally just step up, make that decision and move with it, and again, I like the fact that there wasn't a buck that was pushed. So just a lot of decision-making here that went outside the uniform as well. A lot of decision.
I mean, I think it was good to see that, the checks and balances that are in place are actually good for them to be in place. Right. Because I feel like that's part of it too, right? Like, even if this nursing supervisor, director of nursing isn't doing what she should be doing, you still got custody who's got a different lens saying something's got to get done.
Well, you see the balance in what you're saying. It's awesome. Like, so custody, as I said, I'm going to go back because I want to reiterate something again. I said out of prescribed role because medical was there. So we kind of stay within our element until they're not. So then what happens here, the way the article reads, the moment medical did not pick up, custody did. They picked up the balance. So the moment medical didn't act within that prescribed role, did not act in what the uniform expects them to do, medical. I said medical. Custody stepped up and filled in the gap. And they said, you know what, we're going to step up and fill the gap. And if I was ever to talk to those women, I know for a fact they did it. Besides the fact that it's being a right thing to do, is the fact that that's what a human being would do for another human being. So for people that think that COs are primitive, and guys, this is literally a human decision that was made. you know, a human decision that was made that I know people want to generalize and what, but guys, again, this is crazy because it shows the worst, but the best, you know, and be honest with you, the best people rise from the worst of times. So this is a great way to kind of showcase, again, sad about what happened, but it's a great way to kind of showcase what we do behind the wall. Because here's the funny thing. That whole article never called those 2 female officers guards because the role they played that day, you know? Hey, Connie, would you like to say anything in closing, ma'am?
In closing, I would like to say that these situations continue to highlight how important it is for custody and non-uniform staff to work together, like just period. I think, yes, there will be times where there are lapses in judgment or when things could go so far left, right? But I feel like when we work together and we understand what each other's roles are, it's easier to kind of help each other get through some of these very challenging times or situations that we are faced with behind the wall. I want to say kudos to the officers who stepped up and helped in this situation, to the nurses who didn't give up just because their supervisor didn't see the urgency in the matter. And to, you know, I'm glad that the baby's alive and mom is alive, because this could have ended very differently. And I'm happy that it did not.
Yeah, so and I agree. There's not really much I can add. Just know that the story I thought was relevant because it showed what could happen when we're all not on the same page. But it also shows an adapting and adjusting from the officers that I really wanted to highlight. I mean, it's crazy that I had to use this to highlight something positive. But I really do think that the 2 officers should be recognized. And again, accountability. I think another reason why I brought it up is to let people know that this is not a way to define the system. It's a way to hold somebody accountable for their negligence. But as always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.